Hi everybody, this video should be the culmination of topic 2.3. It should be short because I've only got really two keywords to cover. And as you can see from the title, those two words are the terms bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Obviously I'll pad this out a little bit. I've got two case studies to show you that kind of show both of these effects. One is the use of a pesticide called DDT from the kind of 1940s onwards. And the second one is an industrial pollution in Minamata, Japan, which resulted in something called Minamata Disease. We'll look at these case studies briefly here and we'll expand on them in the classroom. Okay, so let's look at the syllabus statements. Only two sentences really, or maybe three. Bioaccumulation is the buildup of persistent or non-biodegradable pollutants within organisms. And biomagnification is the amplification of these effects as you move up the food chain. So the top predators usually exhibit the worst effects. I'll try and explain why in a few minutes. Under application and skills, the syllabus just says that we need to explain the impact of a persistent or non-biodegradable pollutant in an ecosystem, and we'll use our two case studies of DDT and Minamata disease to try to cover that. Okay, first of all I'm going to pose you a question to which I've given you the answer already, but I want you to understand why this is the case. The trophic level most at risk to toxic pollutants is the top trophic levels, or the top predators. And it's a result of two processes. One is the process where certain pollutants get into the food chain in the first place. We call that bioaccumulation. The biggest effects here are non-polar compounds. Non-polar compounds are compounds that don't dissolve in water, but they do dissolve in non-polar solvents. And the best example of that is body fat in animals or lipids and oils in plants. It's basically fats. When these non-polar compounds dissolve in fat, they stay in fat because the result of being in body fat is that those compounds are not released in urination and defecation. And that's another reason why they build up through the food chain. Biomagnification is the increase in these compounds moving up the food chain. And that's a result of these things sticking in fat, so that they might be quite high in producers, but even higher in primary consumers, because primary consumers eat a lot of plants, and the amount of non-polar compounds that were stuck in the fats in the plants move into a smaller number of primary consumers. The non-polar compounds that are then in the fat of the primary consumers move to the secondary consumers through predation, and so on until you get to the top trophic levels, 5 or 6. Okay, I hope that was a reasonable explanation. We can expand on it in the classroom, of course. And here are the two case studies I want to show you. DDT was or is a pesticide, an insecticide. Its correct name is dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane. Please remember that. I'm joking, you don't need to know that. It's a organic chlorinated compound. It's got these benzene rings. And an interesting effect of having these ring structures, it's very similar to certain hormones in animals, specifically estrogens. So because of its structure, similar to estrogen, chemicals like DDT can interact with the estrogen receptors in animals, including humans, and therefore can have an estrogenic effect, among other effects. Because it's got this kind of structure, especially these benzene rings, that makes it non-polar, non-dissolvable in water. Very similar in structure to estrogens. In birds, an estrogenic effect of these pollutants is to weaken eggshells, so that when parent birds try to incubate their eggs, they crush their own eggshells because the eggshells are so thin, and cause death of chicks before hatching. One of the first people to realise this was the author Rachel Carson, and she wrote a book called Silent Spring in the 1960s, which is widely thought of as being the first publication that started off the environmental movement. This was prior to the 1972 Stockholm United Nations Conference. She called it Silent Spring because she realised that birds were dying, and one of the birds she concentrated on was the bald eagle. The reason why DDT had a big effect on the bald eagle was because of this effect of biomagnification through the food chain, eagle of course being one of the top predators, as well as being a symbolic animal, as being the symbol of the United States. Because of the discovery of these negative effects of DDT, it was banned in most MEDCs throughout the 1970s and 80s. But it's still used in some LEDCs even today. There wasn't a total ban in some LEDCs. I'm not going to tell you why, and I'm going to ask you that question in the classroom and see if you can tell me why it wasn't banned in certain countries and whether that was ethically sound, whether it was an ethically sound decision. As well as these effects on some animals, it's also known now to cause some very negative effects in humans, including some birth defects and damage to the nervous system. Okay, that's DDT. I would like to show you, I don't think I'll show you the whole thing, but this is an advertisement from the 1940s, I believe, or maybe 50s, about the use of DDT. And it's very instructive because in those days, a different paradigm, I guess, but people didn't see DDT as problematic. And this advertisement is actually called DDT Spray It Everywhere. And it was a push by the manufacturers to try to get people to use DDT from everything, from basically treating human skin to get rid of parasites on the skin, to spraying it all over your house to stop insects invading your property and your own house. So take a look at this. I've just embedded it from YouTube.
It begins with the war-born development of DDT. This diabolical weapon of modern science saved millions of humans, but killed billions of insects. Man, with this newly discovered force, has at long last gained the upper hand in our age-old struggle. The really heavy blow fell only a few months ago. It came from laboratories where top scientists from famous universities and from industrial and government organizations collaborated to develop something new and different. They succeeded. They perfected Pestroy, the most effective weapon man has ever wielded against insects. In both its forms, powder and liquid, Pestroy means doomsday to us insects. For this new insect destroyer contains a lot of DDT, not just a little. Its DDT content is even higher than government specifications. But the really sure kill feature of this insect killer isn't simply that it contains DDT, it's the way that it makes sure that bugs get the DDT that's in it. For example, take this liquid form, Pestroy DDT synthetic resin coating, ideal for vertical surfaces. It's brushed on easily and quickly and dries in half an hour. It forms a clear, long-lasting protective coating, scarcely noticeable on most surfaces. Other preparations, sprays for instance, not only irritate the nasal passages
spray all around your living room,
but quickly lose their effectiveness as the fog is dissipated. As a result, spraying must be repeated time after time. But not so with this. Pestroy goes right where it should go to kill insects. And once applied, it keeps right on killing them, week after week, month after month. Here's why. It's compounded with a new type of synthetic resin which binds DDT to any surface, makes it cling, keeps it from brushing off or blowing away. After application, DDT particles form at the surface of the coating, right where the insects walk, creating a long-lasting booby trap for insects. They are densely matted, not spindly and loosely knit, not easily shaken off or blown away. Pest-Destroy liquid coating can be applied wherever insects are found, around doorways, for instance. On screens, where it not only kills insects, but also tends to keep the screen wire from rusting. In lockers, where bugs always go in search of food or clothing. On fruit and vegetable stands.
Seems reasonable, yeah. In your pantry where you store your food in your house.
Grounds for all types of insects.
Okay, I think you get the idea.
On tape.
Interesting that in those days there was no thought that there might be any effects on the food chain, on food chains or food webs. But again, a different paradigm in those days, I guess. Right, second a case study. Quite disturbing, this one. This is the case of Minamata Disease in Japan. It first came to light in the 1950s in this town, Minamata, although this wasn't the only place where it actually occurred. And it was a mysterious disease at first that nobody could find out the source. It was later discovered, more than 10 years after cases started to appear in this town, that it was caused by the dumping of waste products containing mercury into the water of the bay of Minamata. So a chemical factory was releasing mercury basically into the bay between 1932 and about 1968. It began to be bioaccumulated in filter feeding animals like shellfish, where it, just bioaccumulation alone led to huge increases in the amount of mercury in shellfish. And then it also biomagnified through the food chain into fish stocks. The fish and the shellfish were the staple diet of the people that lived in Minamata. And throughout the 1950s, especially this mysterious disease that gave people uncontrollable spasms, shakes, and led to paralysis as well, started to occur. Mercury is obviously a heavy metal. It binds with the cells in the nervous system and causes damage to the nervous system that leads to these effects. Very similar in its effects to motor neuron disease, you might be familiar with. It passed to children in the womb, and it affected thousands and thousands of people before it was eventually, a ban was eventually put in place in 1968. But as we'll see in the classroom, even after this ban was effectively put in place, pollutants around Japan and other places around the world, it still continued. It wasn't an effective ban by any means. I'm going to finish by showing you a video, and I hope it's visible, especially the subtitles here. This lady is Shinobu Sakamoto, and she is a survivor of Minamata disease. She was actually from the town of Minamata, and she was born with Minamata disease. It was passed to her through her from her mother in the womb, and she became a very prominent activist for victims of industrial pollution. She was present at one of the original environmental conference of the United Nations in Stockholm in 1972, and she's attended many more conferences since then. Very moving, I think. I hope I don't start blubbering. It's only 2 minutes long, but I'd like you to just see what she has to say, specifically about Minamata disease and about the victims of industrial pollution.
Thank you very much for coming. And thank you for your speech yesterday. The message was very clear. And what this conference of the parties is doing is to send a very clear message to the world that this should not happen again.
Hello, how are you? So glad that you could come here to this event. Very, very important because you bring a strong message.
あなたが来てくれたことで強いメッセージを伝えてくれました。本当に重要なことです。
おだたのおなたらねあなた棒になりました。大事のねあなた棒です。字を伝えなどに事前に行きました。字の弟だろう伝えるために行きました。みんな解説なっています。だってたいの実はデザインでおじなつ何年もいます。ねあのだぼらおやっておりました。おらよおとだでて出会ったおられたらなどげじだった一緒に来て行きましょう。
Okay, so she was born in 1956 with Minamata disease. She's lived with it all her life, but she's done something very positive by becoming an advocate for victims of industrial pollution and trying to stop industrial pollution in the future. Okay, everybody, I think that was very straightforward. Just two concepts, really, the idea of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Please don't confound them and assume they're the same thing. They're related, but they're not the same thing. Okay, we'll look again at these case studies in the classroom, and I'll just leave you again with that one question. Is it right that DDT has not been banned in some LEDCs, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's still used quite widely? I'm going to leave you that question. Okay, take care everybody, and I'll speak to you in the classroom.